Maria Santos looked at herself in the small mirror of her tiny apartment bathroom. She had been getting ready for 2 hours, but she still did not feel right. The black dress she wore was from a thrift store. She had bought it 3 months ago for $12. It was the nicest dress she owned. Tonight was different from any other night in her life. Maria had a ticket to the most expensive concert hall in New York City. The Metropolitan Opera House was a place where rich people went to listen to music and show off their expensive clothes. Maria knew she did not belong there, but she could not help feeling excited. The ticket had come from her church. Every month, the church held a small raffle. People would put their names in a box and someone would win a prize. Usually, the prizes were small things like a free dinner at a local restaurant or a gift card to the grocery store. But this month was special. Someone had donated a ticket worth $300 to see Marcus Wellington. The famous piano player. Maria had put her name in the box like she always did. She never expected to win anything. She worked as a cleaning lady in office buildings around the city. Every night she would go to work when everyone else was going home. She would clean their desks, empty their trash cans, and mop their floors. The work was hard, but it paid enough money for her small apartment and food. When Father Rodriguez called her name at the church raffle, Maria could not believe it. She had won the expensive ticket. The other people in the church clapped and smiled, but Maria felt scared. She did not know anything about fancy concerts or opera houses. She did not own the right clothes or shoes. She did not even know how to act around rich people, but her friend Carmen convinced her to go. "Maria," Carmen had said, "this is a gift from God. You must go. You love music more than anyone I know. This is your chance to hear real classical music played by a master." Carmen was right about one thing. Maria did love music. When she was alone in the office buildings at night, she would sometimes hum old songs her grandmother had taught her. Her grandmother had been a music teacher in Puerto Rico many years ago. She had taught Maria to play piano when Maria was just a little girl. But that was a long time ago, before life became about working and surviving. Now, standing in front of her mirror, Maria tried to make herself look better. She had borrowed some makeup from her neighbor. She had never been good with makeup, but she tried her best. Her hands were rough from years of cleaning work. No amount of lotion could make them soft like the hands of the rich women who would be at the concert tonight. Maria took the subway to Manhattan. The train was crowded with people going out for Saturday night fun. She sat quietly in her seat, holding her small purse tight. Inside the purse was the ticket and $20, all the extra money she had. She did not know if she would need to buy something at the concert hall. When she came up from the subway, Maria saw the Metropolitan Opera House for the first time. It was huge and beautiful, with big columns and bright lights. People in expensive cars were arriving. Men wore dark suits that looked like they cost more money than Maria made in 3 months. Women wore long dresses that sparkled under the lights. They had jewelry that caught the light and threw it back in tiny rainbows. Maria stood on the sidewalk for a few minutes, watching all the rich people go inside. She felt like she was watching a movie about people who lived completely different lives than her. She almost turned around and went home. But then she remembered Carmen's words about this being a gift from God. She walked up the steps to the big doors. A man in a uniform looked at her ticket and pointed her toward the inside. The lobby of the opera house was even more beautiful than the outside. The ceiling was very high, with paintings and gold decorations everywhere. There were big chandeliers hanging down, making everything sparkle. The floor was made of marble that was so clean Maria could see her reflection in it. People stood around in groups, talking and laughing. The women's voices were high and musical. The men's voices were deep and confident. They all seemed to know each other. They talked about things Maria did not understand, about trips to Europe, about expensive restaurants, about their children's private schools. Maria found her seat in the concert hall. The ticket said she was in the front row. She could not believe how close she would be to the stage. The seat was covered in red velvet and was more comfortable than any chair she had ever sat in. Around her, people continued to arrive and take their seats. She looked around at the other people near her. To her left sat a woman who looked about 60 years old. She wore a dress that was covered in tiny diamonds or crystals that caught the light every time she moved. Her hair was perfect and she smelled like expensive perfume. To Maria's right was a young couple. The man wore a suit that fit him perfectly. The woman's dress looked like it came from a magazine. Maria felt very small and out of place. Her thrift store dress suddenly felt cheap and wrong. Her shoes, which had seemed nice in her apartment, now looked old and worn. She wished she had not come. She wished she was home in her small apartment, listening to music on her old radio, but then the lights began to dim and everything became quiet. A man in a black suit walked onto the stage and sat down at a huge, shiny black piano. This was Marcus Wellington, the famous pianist she had come to see. Even from her seat in the front row, he looked tall and important. His hair was perfectly styled, and his clothes looked expensive. The audience clapped politely as Wellington adjusted his seat and placed his hands above the piano keys. Maria forgot about her dress and her shoes and her rough hands. She forgot about feeling out of place. All she could think about was the music that was about to begin. Wellington began to play, and the most beautiful sounds Maria had ever heard filled the concert hall. The music seemed to come from somewhere deep inside the piano and flow out into the air like water. Maria closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. For the first time all evening, she felt like she belonged exactly where she was. Marcus Wellington finished playing the last notes of Chopin's most difficult piece. The music stopped, and for a moment, the concert hall was completely quiet. Then the audience began to clap. The sound of hundreds of people clapping filled the big room. Wellington stood up from the piano bench and smiled. He was used to this. Every night, people clapped for him like this. He was a tall man with gray hair that was always perfectly styled. His black suit was made by the most expensive tailor in London. Everything about him looked perfect and costly. Wellington had been playing piano for 30 years. He had played in the best concert halls all around the world. Rich people paid hundreds of dollars just to hear him play for one evening. But Wellington had a problem. He was not a kind man. Success had made him think he was better than other people. He looked down on anyone who was not rich or famous like him. He especially did not like poor people. He thought poor people were stupid and had no understanding of real art or music. As the clapping continued, Wellington looked out at the audience. He saw all the usual faces, rich men and women who came to his concerts to be seen by other rich people. They wore expensive clothes and jewelry. They lived in big houses and drove fancy cars. These were his people. These were the only people he thought deserved to hear his music, but then his eyes stopped on someone in the front row. It was Maria Santos sitting alone in her thrift store dress. Even from the stage, Wellington could see that she did not belong with the other people. Her dress looked cheap. Her shoes were old. Her hands looked rough and working hands, not the soft hands of a rich woman. Wellington felt annoyed. How did this woman get a ticket to his concert? This was supposed to be an event for important people only. The tickets cost $300 each. Poor people were not supposed to be here. They did not understand good music. They probably listened to cheap popular music on the radio. An idea came into Wellington's mind. It was not a nice idea, but it made him smile. He would have some fun with this woman. He would embarrass her in front of all these rich people. It would be entertaining, and it would show everyone what happened when poor people tried to be where they did not belong. Wellington walked to the front of the stage. He held up his hand, and the clapping stopped. The audience became quiet again, waiting to hear what the famous pianist would say. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wellington began, his voice smooth and confident, "thank you for that wonderful applause. Tonight has been special, playing for such an educated and cultured audience." He paused and smiled at the rich people in their expensive clothes. "You know," Wellington continued, "I believe that music should be shared. I believe that everyone should have a chance to try to create beautiful sounds." His voice had a tone that sounded kind, but anyone who knew him would recognize the meanness hiding underneath. The audience listened carefully. They respected Wellington and wanted to hear what he had to say. Some of them nodded their heads, thinking he was about to say something wise about music. "So, tonight," Wellington said, "I would like to invite someone from our audience to come up and play something for us. Something simple, of course. Nothing too difficult." His eyes moved across the audience as if he was looking for the right person to invite. Some people in the audience looked around at each other. A few of the younger people looked excited, hoping they might be chosen. But most of the older, richer people looked uncomfortable. They had not come here to watch amateur musicians. They had paid good money to hear a professional concert, Wellington's. Eyes found Maria again. She was sitting very still, looking down at her hands. She clearly felt uncomfortable and out of place. This made Wellington's smile grow bigger. She was perfect for what he wanted to do. "You there," Wellington called out, pointing directly at Maria. "Yes, you in the black dress." His voice was loud enough for everyone in the concert hall to hear. Maria looked up in shock. Her heart began to beat fast. Everyone in the concert hall turned to look at her. Hundreds of eyes were suddenly focused on her face. She felt her cheeks become hot and red. "Would you like to come up and play something for us?" Wellington asked. His voice sounded polite, but there was something mean in his smile. "I am sure. Our audience would love to hear what you can do." Some people in the audience began to whisper to each other. They could see that Maria was different from them. They could tell she was poor and did not belong at such an expensive concert. A few people looked uncomfortable with what Wellington was doing, but most seemed curious to see what would happen. Maria wanted to disappear. She wanted to sink down into her seat and become invisible. She had never been so embarrassed in her life. All these rich, important people were looking at her and waiting to see what she would do. She could hear them whispering about her clothes and wondering how she had gotten a ticket to be here. "Oh, don't be shy," Wellington said, his voice getting louder. "Music is for everyone, right? Surely you must know how to play something. Maybe a simple children's song?" Some people in the audience laughed quietly at his words. Wellington was enjoying himself. This was exactly what he had hoped for. The poor woman was clearly terrified and embarrassed. Soon she would either run away or she would come up and make a fool of herself trying to play his expensive piano. Either way, it would be entertaining for the real audience, the rich people who belonged here. "Come now," Wellington continued. "Don't keep us waiting. I promise the piano won't bite you." More quiet laughter came from some parts of the audience. Maria felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She had never felt so small and helpless. She wanted to stand up and run out of the concert hall. She wanted to go home to her tiny apartment, where no one would stare at her or make fun of her, but then something happened. In her mind, she heard her grandmother's voice. Her grandmother had been dead for 10 years. But Maria could hear her words as clearly as if she was sitting right next to her. "Mia," the voice said, using the Spanish word for my daughter that her grandmother had always called her. "Never let anyone make you feel small. You are worth just as much as anyone in this room. You have something special inside you. Don't let them take that away." Maria remembered her grandmother's hands teaching her to play piano when she was 7 years old. She remembered the old woman's patient voice explaining how music was not about money or fancy clothes. Music was about feeling and heart and soul. The whispering in the audience grew louder. People were starting to feel uncomfortable with how long this was taking. Some felt bad for the woman who was clearly suffering. Others were getting impatient and wanted the evening to continue. Wellington stood on the stage with his arms crossed, waiting. His smile was still there, but now it looked more cruel than before. He was sure he had won. The poor woman would either run away in shame or she would come up and embarrass herself. Either way, he would have proven his point that poor people did not belong in places like this. Maria's heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. The whole concert hall was looking at her. She could feel hundreds of eyes waiting to see what she would do. Some people looked sorry for her. Others looked curious. A few looked mean, like they wanted to see her fail. Wellington stood on the stage with his arms crossed. He was smiling, but it was not a kind smile. He looked like a cat that had caught a mouse. He was sure that Maria would either run away or make a fool of herself. Either way, he would get what he wanted, entertainment at her expense. "We're all waiting," Wellington called out to her. His voice echoed in the big concert hall. "Surely you're not afraid of a little piano?" Some people in the audience laughed. At his words, Maria looked down at her hands. They were shaking. These hands had cleaned thousands of offices. They had scrubbed floors and washed windows. They had worked hard every day for 30 years. But once, a long time ago, these same hands had made beautiful music. She thought about her grandmother again. Abuela Rosa had been the most important person in Maria's young life. Rosa Santos had been a music teacher in San Juan, Puerto Rico. She taught piano to children from rich families. But at night, she would come home to her small house and teach her granddaughter everything she knew about music. "Music is not about having money, Mia," her grandmother used to say. "Music is about having heart. Rich people can buy expensive pianos, but they cannot buy the feeling that comes from here." She would point to her chest. Where her heart was, Maria remembered sitting on a small stool next to her grandmother's old piano. It was not a fancy piano like the one on the stage tonight. It was small and some of the keys stuck when you pressed them. But when her grandmother played, it sounded like the most beautiful instrument in the world. "Close your eyes, Mia, Abuela." Rosa would say, "Don't think about your fingers. Don't think about the notes on the paper. Think about what the music is trying to say. Let it speak through your hands." Maria had been good at piano. Very good. By the time she was 10 years old, she could play pieces that most adult students could not play. Her grandmother said she had a special gift. She said Maria could become a great pianist one day, maybe even play in big concert halls, but then everything changed. Maria's father lost his job. There was no money for food, and the family had to move to New York to find work. Maria was 12 years old when they left Puerto Rico. She never saw her grandmother again. Abuela Rosa died 3 years later, while Maria was learning to speak English and trying to help her family survive in a new country. The piano lessons stopped. There was no money for such things. There was no time either. Maria had to work after school to help pay for rent and food. She cleaned houses and took care of other people's children. By the time she was 18, she had forgotten what it felt like to sit at a piano and make music. Now, 30 years later, she was sitting in the most expensive concert hall in New York City. A famous pianist was asking her to play. All around her, rich people in expensive clothes were waiting to see what she would do. "I don't think she knows how to play," someone whispered loudly enough for Maria to hear. "Look at her hands," another person said. "Those are working hands, not musician hands." "How did she even get a ticket to be here?" a woman asked. The whispers grew louder. Maria felt her face getting hot with embarrassment. She wanted to stand up and run out of the concert hall. She wanted to go home and hide in her small apartment. She wanted to forget this whole terrible evening, but then she heard her grandmother's voice again, as clear as if Rosa was sitting right next to her. "Never let anyone make you small, Mia. You are just as good as anyone in that room. You have music in your heart. That is worth more than all their money and fancy clothes." Maria took a deep breath. She looked up at Wellington, who was still standing on the stage with his cruel smile. She thought about all the nights she had spent cleaning offices while other people were home with their families. She thought about all the years she had worked hard jobs to survive. She thought about how people like Wellington looked at people like her, as if they were not worth anything. "You know what, Maya?" she could hear her grandmother saying. "Sometimes God puts us in places where we can show the world who we really are. Maybe tonight is one of those times." Maria's hand stopped shaking. Something inside her was changing. The fear was still there, but now there was something else too. There was anger at the way Wellington was treating her. There was pride in the woman her grandmother had raised her to be. And deep down, buried under 30 years of hard work and worry, there was still the music. She stood up slowly. The whispers in the audience got quieter as people realized she was going to do something. Wellington's smile got bigger. He thought he was about to get the show he wanted. "Wonderful!" Wellington called out loudly. "Ladies and gentlemen, our brave volunteer is going to join me on stage." He clapped his hands together in fake excitement. Maria began to walk toward the stage. Her legs felt weak, but she kept moving. Step by step, she walked down the aisle toward the front of the concert hall. People turned in their seats to watch her go by. She heard more whispers, but she tried not to listen to what they were saying. As she got closer to the stage, Wellington looked even taller and more important. His expensive suit looked perfect under the bright lights. His hair was styled like he had just come from the best barber in the city. Everything about him screamed money and success. Maria looked down at her own clothes. Her black dress from the thrift store suddenly felt even cheaper. Her old shoes made quiet squeaking sounds on the marble floor. Her purse, which held all the money she had in the world, $20, felt very small in her hands, but she kept walking. With each step, she thought about her grandmother. She thought about all the evenings they had spent together at the old piano. She remembered how it felt to make music, to let beautiful sounds flow from her fingers. There were stairs at the side of the stage. Maria climbed them carefully, holding on to the rail. The stage was bigger than it had looked from her seat. The piano seemed huge and shiny under the bright lights. It was the most beautiful piano she had ever seen. Wellington walked over to meet her. Up close, she could see that he was even more handsome and well-dressed than he had appeared from the audience. But she could also see something mean in his eyes. He was enjoying this. He thought he was about to embarrass her in front of all these important people. "How wonderful that you decided to join me," Wellington said in a loud voice so the audience could hear. "Now, what would you like to play? Do you know any simple songs? Maybe something from a children's book?" The audience laughed again. Maria could hear the laughter echoing around the big concert hall. Some people laughed because they thought Wellington was being funny. Others laughed because they felt uncomfortable and did not know what else to do. Maria looked out at all the faces looking back at her. These people had money and education and social status. They belonged in places like this. She was just a cleaning lady who had won a ticket in a church raffle, but then she looked at the piano. It was calling to her. After 30 years of silence, the music in her heart was waking up. Maria walked slowly toward the big black piano. Each step felt like it took forever. The stage lights were so bright that she could barely see the audience anymore. All she could see were hundreds of shadowy shapes sitting in the darkness, watching her every move. The piano was the most beautiful instrument she had ever seen. It was huge and shiny black like a mirror. The wood was so polished that she could see her reflection in it. This was a Steinway grand piano, the kind that cost more money than Maria made in 5 years of cleaning offices. Wellington followed behind her. Still smiling his mean smile, he was walking like he owned the whole world. His expensive shoes made clicking sounds on the stage floor. He was already thinking about how funny this was going to be. He imagined telling this story to his rich friends later about the poor cleaning lady who tried to play his piano. "Here we are," Wellington said, loudly so everyone could hear him. "This beautiful piano is waiting for you. I'm sure you'll do your best." His words sounded nice, but his voice had a nasty tone that made it clear he was making fun of her. Maria stopped in front of the piano bench. It was covered in soft black leather and looked more expensive than any piece of furniture in her apartment. She had never sat on anything so nice. Her rough, work-worn hands touched the edge of the bench gently. "Go ahead, sit down," Wellington said, waving his hand toward the bench. "Don't be shy. The piano won't hurt you." Some people in the audience laughed at his joke. Maria sat down very carefully. The bench was the perfect height, and it was more comfortable than any chair she had ever sat in. She could feel the expensive leather under her legs. For a moment, she felt like she was dreaming. How had she, Maria Santos from the Bronx, ended up sitting at a piano that was worth more money than she would see in her whole life? Wellington stood beside her with his arms crossed. He was waiting for her to embarrass herself. He expected her to hit a few wrong notes, maybe try to play "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" or some other simple song. Then everyone would laugh. and he would have proven his point that poor people did not belong in places like this. "Now then," Wellington said, "what would you like to play?" "Something simple, I hope. We don't want to make this too difficult for you." Maria looked at the piano keys. There were 88 of them, black and white, arranged in the pattern she had memorized as a child. She had not touched piano keys in 30 years, but they looked exactly the same as they had on her grandmother's old piano. Her hands were shaking again. These hands had scrubbed thousands of floors. They had cleaned countless windows and toilets. They had worked hard every day just to survive. Could they still make music? Did they remember how to find the beautiful sounds that were hiding inside the piano? Wellington was getting impatient. "Any time now," he said. "We're all waiting." His voice was getting louder and more demanding. Maria placed her hands on the keys. They felt cold and smooth under her fingers. For 30 years, she had tried to forget about music. It was too painful to think about what she had lost when her family left Puerto Rico. It hurt too much to remember the dreams she had given up. But now, sitting at this beautiful piano, all the memories came flooding back. She remembered her grandmother's gentle voice teaching her to play. She remembered the feeling of making music, of letting beautiful sounds flow from her heart through her hands. "Mia," she could hear her grandmother saying, "music never leaves you. It stays inside, waiting for the right moment to come out again." Maria closed her eyes. She tried to block out Wellington's mean smile. She tried to forget about all the rich people watching her. She tried to pretend she was back in her grandmother's small house in Puerto Rico, sitting at the old piano that had some broken keys. The concert hall became very quiet. Everyone was waiting to see what this poor woman in her cheap dress would do. Some people felt sorry for her, others were curious. A few were already preparing to laugh when she failed. Wellington stood there with his arms crossed, looking very pleased with himself. He was sure that in a few seconds this woman would hit some wrong notes and everyone would see how right he was. Poor people did not understand real music. They had no place in concert halls like this one. Maria took a deep breath. She thought about all the years she had spent cleaning other people's offices while they went home to their comfortable lives. She thought about all the times people had looked at her like she was nobody, like she did not matter. She thought about her grandmother, who had believed she could be something special. Then, without opening her eyes, Maria began to play. The first notes that came from the piano were soft and gentle, but they were perfect. Each note was exactly right, clear and beautiful. The sound filled the huge concert hall like water filling a glass. Wellington's smile began to fade. These were not the wrong notes he had expected. These were not the sounds of someone who did not know how to play piano. These notes were perfect. Maria's fingers moved across the keys like they remembered exactly where to go. 30 years of silence melted away. The music that had been sleeping inside her heart woke up and began to flow through her hands. She was playing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. This was one of the hardest pieces of music ever written for piano. It was so difficult that even professional pianists spent years learning to play it well. Most people could not play it at all, but Maria was not just playing the notes correctly. She was playing them with feeling, with emotion, with the kind of soul that cannot be taught in any music school. Every note told a story. Every chord carried the weight of 30 years of hard work and lost dreams. Wellington's mouth fell open. He could not believe what he was hearing. This woman, this poor cleaning lady in her cheap dress, was playing one of the most difficult pieces in all of classical music. And she was playing it perfectly. The audience began to realize that something amazing was happening. The quiet whispers stopped. People sat up straighter in their seats. This was not what anyone had expected. Maria's hands moved across the keys like she had been playing this piano her whole life. The music grew stronger and more powerful. It filled every corner of the concert hall with beautiful, perfect sound. Wellington stepped back, his face pale with shock. He had expected to embarrass this woman. He had expected to make her look foolish in front of all these important people. But instead, he was watching something incredible happen. The music continued to grow and build. Maria's whole body moved with the rhythm. Her face, which had looked scared and embarrassed just minutes before, now looked peaceful and confident. This was where she belonged. This was who she really was. For 30 years, Maria Santos had been just a cleaning lady. But tonight, in front of hundreds of rich and important people, she was becoming herself again. She was becoming the musician her grandmother had always known she could be. The piano sang under her hands. Every note was perfect. Every phrase was filled with emotion and meaning. This was not just music. This was magic. The music filled the concert hall like a river of gold. Maria's fingers danced across the keys with perfect grace. Every note was exactly where it should be. Every sound was pure and beautiful. The difficult music that had taken Wellington years to learn was flowing from Maria's hands like it was the easiest thing in the world. But what the audience did not know was Maria's real story. They did not know about the little girl in Puerto Rico who had been called a miracle child. They did not know about the years of training that had made her fingers remember every note. Even after 30 years of silence, Maria Santos had been born with a special gift. Even as a tiny baby, she would stop crying whenever she heard music. When she was 3 years old, she could hum any song perfectly after hearing it just once. By the time she was 5, she was picking out melodies on her grandmother's old piano. Her grandmother, Rosa Santos, had been one of the best piano teachers in all of Puerto Rico. Rosa had studied music in Spain when she was young. She had played in concerts and taught the children of rich families. But Rosa's greatest student was not one of those rich children. It was her own granddaughter, Maria. "This child has something very special," Rosa used to tell Maria's parents. "She does not just play music, she feels it in her soul. She understands things that I cannot teach." By the time Maria was 7 years old, she was playing pieces that most adult students could never master. Her small hands could stretch across the keys in ways that amazed everyone who saw her play. But it was not just her technique that was special, it was the way she made the music come alive. "When Maria plays," Rosa told her friends, "it is like the piano is singing. She does not just press the keys. She speaks to the instrument, and it speaks back to her." Rosa began entering Maria in competitions when she was 8 years old. Maria won every single contest she entered. Judges could not believe that such a young child could play so beautifully. Newspaper writers came to hear her play. They called her the little miracle of San Juan. When Maria was 9, a famous music teacher from New York came to Puerto Rico on vacation. Someone told him about the amazing little girl who could play piano like an angel. He came to Rosa's house to hear Maria play. "I have been teaching music for 40 years, the man told Rosa after listening to Maria. "I have never heard anything like this. This child could become one of the greatest pianists in the world. You must bring her to New York. She needs better teachers and bigger opportunities." Rosa was excited but also worried. She knew Maria had incredible talent, but New York was far away and expensive. Maria's family was not rich. Her father worked in a factory. Her mother cleaned houses. They did not have money to move to New York or pay for expensive music lessons, but Rosa began saving every penny she could. She took extra students and worked longer hours. She sold her jewelry and her good furniture. She was determined to give Maria the chance she deserved. Maria continued to improve. By the time she was 10, she was playing pieces that were so difficult that even professional pianists struggled with them. She played Chopin and Bach and Rachmaninoff as if the music was part of her own heartbeat. "She does not practice like other children," Rosa explained to people who asked about Maria's success. "Other children have to work hard to memorize the notes and learn the fingering. Maria just listens to a piece once or twice and then she can play it perfectly. It is like God gave her a direct connection to the music." Maria loved playing piano more than anything else in the world. While other children were playing games or watching television, Maria was at the piano. But she never felt like she was working or studying. Playing music felt as natural as breathing. When Maria was 11, Rosa finally saved enough money to take her to New York for a special audition. They flew on an airplane for the first time in their lives. Maria was nervous but excited. She was going to play for the best music teachers in America. The audition was at a famous music school in Manhattan. Maria played 3 different pieces for a panel of 5 judges. When she finished, the room was completely quiet for almost a full minute. "Young lady," one of the judges finally said, "you have the most natural talent I have seen in 30 years of teaching. We would be honored to have you study here." Rosa cried with joy. Maria was going to get the chance to become the great pianist she was meant to be. They made plans to move to New York the following year when Maria turned 12, but then disaster struck. Maria's father lost his job at the factory. The factory was closing down and moving to another country. Hundreds of people in their town lost their jobs at the same time. There was no work to be found anywhere. Maria's family faced a terrible choice. They could not afford to live in Puerto Rico without her father's income. They had to move to New York immediately to find work, not for music lessons, but just to survive. When they arrived in New York, everything was different from what they had planned. Instead of Maria going to the famous music school, the whole family had to work just to pay for food and rent. Maria's father got a job washing dishes in a restaurant. Her mother cleaned office buildings at night. And Maria, even though she was only 12 years old, had to help support the family. There was no money for piano lessons. There was no time for practice. There was barely money for food and a place to sleep. The dreams of making Maria into a great pianist seemed impossible now. Rosa tried to find a piano that Maria could use, but pianos were expensive and their tiny apartment had no room for one. Rosa found a job cleaning houses, and sometimes she would ask her employers if Maria could practice on their pianos. But most people said no. "I'm sorry, Mia," Rosa told Maria one day, tears in her eyes. "I know this is not what we planned, but we have to focus on surviving now. Maybe later, when things get better, you can go back to music," but things never got better. Rosa got sick when Maria was 15. She could not work anymore, so Maria had to take care of her grandmother and help support the family. Maria got a job cleaning offices after school. By the time she was 18, she was working 2 jobs and had no time to even think about music. Rosa died when Maria was 22. On her deathbed, she took Maria's hands in hers. "Promise me something, Mia," Rosa whispered. "Promise me you will never forget the music. It is still inside you. Someday, when the time is right, it will come back." Maria promised, but as the years went by, the music seemed further and further away. She worked and struggled and survived. She got married and had children. She divorced and raised her children alone. Through all of it, she cleaned offices and buildings, using her hands for scrubbing and washing instead of making beautiful music. But now, 30 years later, sitting at this magnificent piano in the Metropolitan Opera House, all of that training and all of that talent was waking up. Her fingers remembered everything Rosa had taught her. Her heart remembered the feeling of making music that could make people cry with joy. The audience was beginning to understand that they were witnessing something extraordinary. This was not a cleaning lady trying to play piano. This was a master musician who had been hidden away for 30 years, finally coming home. The music was growing stronger and more beautiful with every passing moment. Maria's hands moved across the piano keys like they were dancing. The difficult piece she was playing required incredible skill, but she made it look easy. Each note was perfect, clear, and full of emotion. Something magical was happening in the concert hall. The audience was beginning to realize that they were not watching what they had expected. This was not a poor woman embarrassing herself. This was not a joke or entertainment at someone else's expense. This was real music, played by someone with extraordinary talent. Mrs. Elizabeth Hartford sat in the 3rd row, wearing a diamond necklace that cost more than most people's houses. She had come to the concert tonight because it was the fashionable thing to do. She usually spent concerts thinking about her next dinner party or checking her expensive watch to see how much longer she had to sit there, but tonight was different. As Maria played, Mrs. Hartford found herself leaning forward in her seat. The music was reaching into her heart in a way that surprised her. She had heard many famous pianists play this same piece, But none of them had made her feel like this. Tears began to form in Mrs. Hartford's eyes. She could not understand why. She was not usually an emotional person. She had trained herself to be proper and controlled at all times. But something about Maria's music was breaking through all her careful walls. "My God," she whispered to herself, "this is the most beautiful thing I have ever heard." Next to her, her husband Charles was having his own reaction. He was a successful businessman who prided himself on being practical and logical. He usually found classical music boring and only attended concerts to please his wife and maintain their social standing. But as he listened to Maria play, Charles felt something he had not felt in years. The music reminded him of his childhood, of his mother singing lullabies when he was scared. It reminded him of feelings he had forgotten he could have. Charles looked around the concert hall and saw that other people were having similar reactions. The woman in front of him was crying openly. The elderly man across the aisle was shaking his head in amazement. Even the young people, who usually looked bored at classical concerts, were sitting perfectly still, completely absorbed in the music. Wellington stood frozen on the stage, watching Maria play his expensive piano better than he had ever played it himself. His face had gone completely white, his mouth hung open in shock. All his meanness and cruelty had disappeared, replaced by pure amazement. He had expected to embarrass this poor woman. He had wanted to show everyone that people like her did not belong in places like this. But instead she was showing him what real music sounded like. She was playing with a depth of feeling that he had never achieved in all his years of professional performance. Wellington realized something that horrified him. He had spent his whole career thinking he was a great pianist. He had won awards and played in the best concert halls around the world. But listening to Maria play, he understood that he had been fooling himself. He played the notes correctly, but he had never made music that came from the soul like this. In the audience, more and more people were beginning to cry. The music was telling a story that everyone could understand, even if they did not speak the same language. It was a story of dreams lost and found, of talent hidden and revealed, of the human spirit refusing to be broken no matter how hard life became. Maria herself was crying as she played, but she did not stop. The tears rolled down her cheeks and dripped onto the piano keys, but her fingers never missed a note. She was pouring 30 years of hidden pain and beauty into this music. Every note carried the weight of all the years she had spent, cleaning other people's offices while dreaming of making music. The music spoke of her grandmother's love and sacrifice. It spoke of the little girl who had been called a miracle and the woman who had learned to scrub floors with the same hands that could create such beauty. It spoke of dreams deferred but never truly forgotten. Judge Patricia Williams sat in the front row, feeling her heart break and heal at the same time. She was an important person in the city, used to being in control and making difficult decisions. But tonight, listening to Maria play, she felt like a child again, full of wonder and emotion. "How is this possible?" she whispered to herself. "How can someone play like this?" Behind her, Robert Shun, a music critic for the city's biggest newspaper, was frantically taking notes. He had attended thousands of concerts in his career. He had heard all the famous pianists and written reviews of their performances. But he had never heard anything like what he was hearing tonight. "This is not just music," he wrote in his notebook with shaking hands. "This is a revelation. This is what music is supposed to sound like when it comes from a place of true understanding and deep feeling." The music was reaching its most difficult and beautiful section now. Maria's hands flew across the keys with impossible speed and precision. But it was not just technical skill that impressed the audience. It was the way she made every single note matter, the way she turned each phrase into poetry. Mrs. Catherine Moore, an elderly woman who had been attending concerts for over 60 years, sat with tears streaming down her face. She had heard Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto hundreds of times. She thought she knew every note, every nuance of the piece, but Maria was showing her things in the music that she had never heard before. She was finding meanings and emotions that even the greatest professional pianists had missed. It was like hearing the piece for the very first time. Who is this woman? Mrs. Moore asked her companion. Where has she been hiding all these years? The same question was going through the minds of everyone in the audience. How was it possible that someone with this much talent had been unknown? How could someone play with such mastery and still be sitting in the audience instead of on the stage? Dr. Michael Rodriguez, a professor of music at the city's best university, was completely stunned. He taught advanced students who had been studying piano their whole lives. None of them could play like this. Very few professional pianists could play like this. This is impossible, he muttered. You cannot play Rachmaninoff like this without decades of professional training and constant practice. But look at her. Hands, those are working hands. Those are not the hands of someone who practices piano 8 hours a day. But the evidence was right in front of him. Maria was playing with a level of skill and musicality that he had rarely witnessed in his entire career. She was doing things with the music that textbooks said were impossible without years of intensive study. The concert hall had become completely silent except for the sound of the piano and the occasional sob from audience members who were overwhelmed by the beauty of what they were hearing. Even the ushers and security guards who usually moved around during performances had stopped to listen. Maria was nearing the end of the piece now, and she was playing with such power and passion that the whole building seemed to vibrate with the music. Every person in the audience could feel the sound not just in their ears, but in their hearts and souls. Wellington finally understood what his grandmother had tried to teach him years ago, before fame and success had made him cruel and arrogant. Music is not about impressing people, Marcus, she had said. Music is about touching their hearts and helping them remember what it means to be human. Tonight, watching Maria play, Wellington finally understood what his grandmother had meant, and he was ashamed of the man he had become. Maria's hands moved across the piano keys for the final section of the piece. This was the most difficult part of all. The music became faster and more complex. Her fingers had to move like lightning while still making every note perfect and beautiful. Most pianists struggled with this section even after years of practice, but Maria played it like she was born to play this music. Her hands flew across the keys in a blur of motion. Every note was exactly right. Every chord was perfectly timed. The music built and built, growing more powerful and emotional with each passing second. The audience sat completely still, afraid to breathe or move. They did not want to disturb the magic that was happening on the stage. Many people were crying openly now, not caring what others might think. The music was so beautiful and so moving that they could not control their emotions. Mrs. Hartford, the wealthy woman in the diamond necklace, was sobbing like a child. She had never felt anything like this before. The music was reaching into parts of her heart that she had forgotten existed. All her money and social status meant nothing compared to what she was hearing right now. This is the most beautiful thing in the world, she whispered through her tears. Wellington stood on the side of the stage, watching Maria with complete amazement. His whole body was shaking. He could not believe what he was seeing and hearing. This woman, this poor cleaning lady he had tried to embarrass, was playing better than any pianist he had ever heard. He thought about all the cruel things he had done in his career. He remembered all the times he had looked down on people who were not rich or famous like him. He thought about how wrong he had been about everything. I am a fool, he whispered to himself. I have been such a terrible fool. The music was reaching its final moments now. Maria's whole body moved with the rhythm of the piece. She was no longer just playing the piano. She had become part of the music itself. The piano was singing under her hands like a living thing. In the audience, Dr. Rodriguez, the music professor, was frantically trying to understand what he was witnessing. He had studied music his entire life. He knew everything there was to know about technique and theory. But Maria was doing something that could not be explained by any textbook. She is not just playing the notes, he said to himself in wonder. She is playing the feelings behind the notes. She is playing the composer's soul. Judge Williams, the important city official, felt like her whole understanding of the world was changing. She had always believed that success came from hard work and education and having the right opportunities. But here was this woman who had none of those things, and she was creating something more beautiful than anything Judge Williams had ever experienced. Talent like this does not come from schools or money, Judge Williams realized. This comes from somewhere much deeper. The final chords of the piece were approaching. Maria's hands moved across the entire length of the keyboard. The music filled every corner of the huge concert hall. It seemed to lift everyone in the audience up and carry them away to a place of pure beauty and emotion. Robert Chun, the newspaper critic, had stopped writing notes. His hands were shaking too much to hold his pen. In 40 years of reviewing concerts, he had never heard anything that came close to this. He knew that he was witnessing something that would change his life forever. This is not a performance. He thought, this is a miracle. Maria played the final notes of the piece. The last chord rang out across the concert hall, pure and perfect and heartbreakingly beautiful. Then the sound faded away, leaving only silence. The silence lasted for what felt like forever. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The entire audience sat frozen, still lost in the magic of what they had just heard. Then slowly, one person stood up. It was Mrs. Catherine Moore, the elderly woman who had been attending concerts for 60 years. She rose from her seat with tears streaming down her face and began to clap. The sound of her clapping echoed in the quiet concert hall. For a moment, she was the only person making any noise. Then, one by one, other people began to stand up and join her. Charles Hartford stood up next, pulling his sobbing wife to her feet with him. Then Dr. Rodriguez rose, followed by Judge Williams. Within seconds, the entire audience was on their feet, clapping as hard as they could, but this was not ordinary clapping. This was something much more powerful. People were not just showing appreciation for a good performance. They were celebrating something miraculous. They were honoring something sacred that they had been lucky enough to witness. The clapping grew louder and louder. It echoed off the walls and ceiling of the great concert hall. People were cheering and shouting. Some were still crying. Others were laughing with pure joy. Everyone was on their feet, giving Maria the standing ovation of their lives. Maria sat at the piano bench, completely overwhelmed. She could not believe what was happening. The same people who had whispered about her cheap dress and rough hands were now cheering for her like she was the greatest pianist in the world. The applause went on and on. 5 minutes passed, then 10 minutes. People showed no signs of stopping. Their hands hurt from clapping so hard, but they could not stop. They needed to express their feelings somehow, and clapping was the only way they knew how. Wellington slowly walked across the stage toward Maria. His face was pale and his eyes were full of tears. When he reached her, he did something that shocked everyone in the audience, including himself. He got down on one knee in front of her and bowed his head in respect. "Forgive me," he said, his voice barely audible over the continuing applause. "I am so sorry. I had no idea. Please forgive me for what I tried to do to you." Maria looked down at this famous, wealthy man kneeling in front of her. A few hours ago, she had been afraid of him. Now she could see that he was just another human being capable of making mistakes and learning from them. She reached out and gently touched his shoulder. "It's okay," she said softly. "Music has a way of teaching us all what really matters." Wellington stood up and took Maria's hand. Together they faced the audience that was still clapping and cheering. He raised their joined hands high in the air, showing everyone that he recognized her as the master musician she truly was. The applause somehow grew even louder. People in the balcony were standing on their chairs. The sound was so loud it could probably be heard outside the building. This was more than just appreciation for good music. This was recognition of something extraordinary and life-changing. Maria looked out at all the faces in the audience. These people who had seemed so different from her just an hour ago now looked at her with love and respect. She realized that music had the power to break down all the walls between people. Rich or poor, educated or not, everyone could understand the language of the heart. As the applause continued, Maria felt her grandmother's presence with her. She could almost hear Abuela Rosa's voice saying, "I told you the music would come back. Mia, I told you to never give up hope." The standing ovation lasted for 15 minutes. When it finally began to quiet down, everyone in the concert hall knew they had witnessed something they would remember for the rest of their lives. They had seen a miracle happen right in front of them. The standing ovation finally ended, but the magic of the evening was just beginning. As people slowly sat back down in their seats, they were all talking excitedly about what they had just witnessed. Nobody wanted to leave the concert hall. They wanted to stay and talk about the incredible performance they had just heard. Maria sat at the piano, still trying to understand what had happened. Her hands were shaking and her heart was beating fast. She felt like she was in a dream. How had her life changed so completely in just one evening? Wellington stood beside her, looking very different from the arrogant man he had been just an hour earlier. His expensive suit was wrinkled and there were tears on his face. He looked humble and ashamed of how he had treated Maria. "I need to make this right," Wellington said to Maria. "I need to do something to help you. You have a gift that the world needs to hear." Before Maria could answer, people from the audience began coming up to the stage. They wanted to meet her and tell her how much her music had moved them. Mrs. Hartford was one of the first to approach. "My dear," Mrs. Hartford said, her eyes still red from crying, "that was the most beautiful music I've ever heard in my life." "Who are you? Where did you learn to play like that?" Maria felt embarrassed again. She was not used to so much attention. "I'm just a cleaning lady," she said quietly. "I work in office buildings at night." "You are not just anything," said Dr. Rodriguez, the music professor, who had also come up to the stage. "You are one of the most talented pianists I have ever heard. Your technique is perfect, but more importantly, you play with soul. That cannot be taught in any school." More and more people gathered around Maria. They all wanted to shake her hand and tell her how her music had affected them. Many of them were important people in the city, business leaders, judges, doctors, and artists. But tonight, they all looked at Maria with respect and admiration. A young man pushed through the crowd. He was holding a cell phone in his hand. "Ma'am," he said excitedly, "I recorded your performance on my phone. I posted it online and it's already getting thousands of views. People are sharing it everywhere." Maria did not understand what this meant. She did not know much about the internet or social media. But Wellington understood immediately. "This is going to change everything," Wellington told her. "When people see this video, the whole world is going to know about you." The young man was right. Within just a few hours, the video of Maria's performance had been watched by millions of people around the world. People were sharing it on Facebook and Twitter and sending it to their friends. The story of the cleaning lady who played like an angel was spreading faster than anyone could believe. By the next morning, Maria's phone was ringing constantly. Reporters from newspapers and television stations wanted to interview her. Record companies wanted to offer her contracts. Concert halls around the world wanted to book her for performances. Maria felt overwhelmed by all the attention. She was still living in her tiny apartment in the Bronx, still wearing her old clothes, still trying to understand how her life had changed so dramatically. Wellington kept his promise to help her. He used his connections in the music world to make sure Maria got the best opportunities. He introduced her to good managers and agents who would protect her interests. He even paid for her to get some new clothes that were suitable for a professional musician. But Wellington did more than just help with Maria's career. He also learned something important about himself. He realized that his cruelty and arrogance had made him a smaller person. He decided to change the way he treated others. "I have been performing for 30 years, Wellington told a newspaper reporter, "but I never understood what music was really about until I heard Maria play. She taught me that talent and beauty can be found anywhere, and that we should never judge people by their circumstances." 3 months after that magical night at the Metropolitan Opera House, Maria recorded her first album. The recording company wanted her to make a classical album, but Maria insisted on including some of the songs her grandmother had taught her, simple folk songs from Puerto Rico that she arranged for piano. The album was called Songs My Grandmother Taught Me, and It became one of the best-selling classical albums of the year. People loved hearing Maria's story almost as much as they loved her music. She became a symbol of hope for anyone who had ever had a dream that seemed impossible. 6 months later, Maria performed at Carnegie Hall, one of the most famous concert venues in the world. The concert sold out in less than an hour. People came from all over the country to hear the cleaning lady who had become a classical music sensation. Before the concert, Maria visited her grandmother's grave in Puerto Rico. She brought flowers and sat by the headstone for a long time. "Abuela," she said softly, "I kept my promise. I never forgot the music." And you were right, it came back when the time was right. The Carnegie Hall performance was even more moving than her first performance at the Metropolitan Opera House. Maria played some of the most difficult pieces in classical music, but she also played the simple folk songs that her grandmother had taught her. The audience gave her another standing ovation that lasted for 20 minutes, but Maria's greatest achievement was not her fame or success. It was what she did with her newfound wealth and influence. She established the Rosa Santos Music Foundation, named after her grandmother. The foundation provided music lessons and instruments for poor children who could not afford them. "Every child deserves a chance to make music," Maria told reporters at the foundation's opening ceremony. "Talent does not care if you are rich or poor. It can be found anywhere, in anyone." Maria also insisted on keeping her job cleaning offices, at least part-time. She said it helped her remember where she came from and kept her humble. "Some people think it's strange that I still clean offices," Maria said in an interview. "But that work taught me important things. It taught me that all honest work has dignity. It taught me to appreciate beauty when I found it, because I knew how hard life could be." A year after that first performance, Maria was invited to perform at the White House for the president. She wore a beautiful gown, but she also wore a small pin shaped like a mop and bucket to remind everyone that she was proud of her working-class background. The president introduced her by saying, "Maria Santos reminds us that greatness can be found in the most unexpected places. She shows us that we should never underestimate anyone and that dreams deferred are not always dreams denied." Maria's story became known around the world. Books were written about her life. A movie was made about the night that changed everything. But Maria always said the same thing when reporters asked her about her success. "I am grateful for everything that has happened," she would say. But the most important thing is not the fame or money. The most important thing is that people learned something that night at the Opera House. They learned not to judge others by their appearance or circumstances. They learned that everyone deserves respect and dignity. Wellington and Maria became close friends. He often introduced her concerts, and he always told the audience about the lessons she had taught him about humility and respect. "Maria saved my soul," Wellington would say. "She showed me what it really means to be human." Years later, when people asked Maria about the secret to her success, she would smile and remember her grandmother's words. "Music is not about impressing people, Mia. Music is about touching their hearts and helping them remember the beauty in life." Maria Santos had done exactly that. She had taken her pain and struggle and turned them into something beautiful that touched millions of hearts around the world.